I'm pretty sure that the ACC in some form will exist next year. It's not going to have a Pac 12 type collapse, mainly due to its TV deal being locked in through 2036. Now, certainly, there are a few different Armageddon scenarios for the ACC, and those are not completely off the table. But I want to examine if the ACC does, let's just say, for example, lose four teams, those four teams possibly being FSU, Clemson, maybe NC State and North Carolina, or also Miami. How would they replace them with, and would Memphis be possibly a good fit? Now, Memphis is having a huge stadium renovation. It's taken them a few years to actually get this passed, but this is right around a $350 million renovation. They're also talking about renovating the FedEx Forum where the Memphis basketball team plays, but certainly their stadium is in desperate need. When you look at it currently, it's in desperate need of a big-time renovation, and if they get this, supposedly by 2025, will it make them a legitimate option for the ACC? Will it make them more attractive? If the ACC loses 2 to 4 teams, where would they go? Would it be Stanford and Cal, or could we see, and this, by the way, could be a legitimate option for the Big Ten in regards to Stanford. The Big Ten should do is add Stanford as an all-sports member in everything but football, have Stanford play football as an independent or in a group of 5 league, and then possibly add them to the Big Ten football in the future. Stanford, I'm sure, would want the money. If they're joining the Big Ten and all other sports but football, that's going to be a problem in terms of revenue because football is the heavy, earner. But that could be something that Stanford might consider if they're... Right now, it seems like Stanford's only options, it would be independent in terms of football. It would be independent, Big Ten, or ACC. One of those three things probably is going to happen. But getting back to the whole thing with Memphis, let's say the ACC loses some teams. I do think because of the situation surrounding Memphis, they're in a decent TV market. They would probably be interested. They've got this nice renovation. It could help them possibly join the conference, along with maybe you're looking at SMU. Maybe you look at other teams in the American. You want to keep that conference together. I do think, depending on the money, because the ACC deal is so bad and it really doesn't escalate up very much, it does make sense for even other teams in the ACC to look to join either the Big Ten, SEC, or even the Big 12. And we get different tweets about the Big 12. 4 realistic ACC teams I want. Miami, number 1. I'd be very surprised. Right now, it does seem like a lot of the people within the Big 12 are trying to gun for Miami. If that conference goes up in smoke, I would be shocked. I think Miami, it's the Big Ten or the SEC for them. They kind of have a weird situation. They play at Hard Rock Stadium, but overall, they still do. They've got a ton of NIL money. Although, honestly, they are getting investigated for that. The lead businessman is. But I would say Miami. Because you got to remember, the Big Ten, they want to get into the state of Florida. So they're going to gun for Florida State. But if they can't get Florida State, I do think they would settle on Miami. NC State at number 2 for the ACC. NC State might be following North Carolina wherever they go. There's something about they have to be in the same conference as North Carolina, but maybe that can get rescinded. I'm not sure. Virginia Tech at number 3. I mean, it's possible for sure. And then Louisville. One team that's not mentioned that I can pretty much guarantee you, number 1, if they do add 4 teams from the ACC, if the ACC just goes belly up, they're not going to get Miami, but they will definitely get Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a perfect fit for the Big 12. There's no denying it. Will they get NC State? I have my doubts. I think they could get Virginia Tech. I think they could get Louisville. Louisville is in a weird spot because their basketball program is really down right now. And in terms of their attractiveness, the TV market being in Kentucky, you can understand them possibly joining the SEC. They kind of feel like an SEC program. I just don't know if the SEC would really be motivated to take Louisville unless they are expecting a big basketball turnaround from them. Their football program, they've kind of always been a 6-6, 7-5 team. They had a good few years, obviously, with Lamar Jackson. But other than that, really for the ACC right now, if I had to predict, I would say I'd give them Virginia Tech. I would give them Pittsburgh. NC State is a possibility. Maybe Syracuse is a possibility as well, depending. I could also see Syracuse in the Big Ten, but you got to remember the Big Ten is running out of spots, and it just depends on if the Big Ten next year wants to add Stanford and Cal. That'll be something to look at. But getting back to the whole idea of the ACC trying to stay together, let's say they lose 4 teams, I do think, Memphis, with their current situation, with the stadium renovation upcoming, they would be a team the ACC would look at trying to reinforce the conference, similar to what happened to the Big 12 after they lost their 2 best schools. But a lot of this is really up in the air right now because there's really one of 2 things that can happen. It seems like for sure Clemson and FSU are going to be gone. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen this offseason. I mean, we do have the deadline coming up where they're, very likely Clemson and FSU will be remaining in the ACC throughout next year unless something crazy happens today, but I haven't even heard anything on that. So I would expect Clemson, FSU, a minimum, will be in the ACC for at least one more year. Obviously, they're going to be this year, and then next year, next summer, is when we probably have the situation regarding the ACC and also the Pac-12, and maybe we do get Stanford and Cal joining the Big Ten or something where Stanford joins the Big Ten in basically all sports outside of football, and then later down the line joins for football. But I'm really not understanding the motivation of that. Why wouldn't you, if you're the Big Ten, wouldn't you just add Stanford for everything? If you're going to add Stanford, you might as well do it. I can understand Stanford joining the West Coast Conference in everything but football and waiting for the Big Ten. I can also understand Stanford joining the Mountain West Conference in everything and then waiting for the Big Ten while still remaining an independent. The only conference in terms of football right now I see Stanford joining is the Big Ten or the ACC. Cal, I don't have a really good read on them. They might be a little bit more desperate, but I know both of those schools do not want to join the Big 12 at all. And it seems like they're weighing their options and trying to, wait for things to happen, similar to what happened with Oregon and Washington. I mean, just look 3 or 4 months ago, you can make an argument that Oregon and Washington were in terrible positions. They were in a dead conference that was on the verge of getting a horrible TV deal, but they knew they were very likely joining the Big Ten. And you still had the posturing from the Big Ten with their commissioner coming out and saying, we're not adding anyone, when it was obvious for the past year they were always going to add Oregon and Washington. This could be a similar scenario with Stanford, but when it comes to the ACC, if they're able to keep teams together, because you also have to understand the grant of rights through 2036, there's also the ESPN element, and I have a feeling that ESPN is going to be involved in this in a big way, considering ESPN has all the major TV rights of all the big-time ACC games, all the big-time SEC games. They have the ACC network with ESPN. They have the SEC network with ESPN. If Clemson and FSU are leaving, and the Clemson and FSU actually go to the Big Ten, that would be a mega loss for ESPN. That's why I don't think ESPN lets it happen. And if I'm Clemson and FSU, I'm saying, listen, yes, we might have to pay more in terms of buyout, but we can go to the Big Ten, use that as leverage to try and get the buyout down if that's the only right way out of the conference through the buyout. It depends how the grant of rights is structured, but you can get the buyout down and ESPN can just say, all right, listen, we're not losing the rights to you two. You can go to the SEC. We're going to go to the 9-game conference schedule. The end goal is a 10-game conference schedule because we want more money and more content. But we'll go to the 9-game conference schedule. We're going to keep the rest of the ACC together because it is still an ironclad grant of rights. And we're going to look to expand the ACC. And then maybe at that point they look to Stanford and Cal. But you're still running into the same problem with the ACC trying that West Coast expansion. The travel is horrible. There's no West Wing unless they somehow said we're going full West Wing 2.0 and also adding Oregon State and Washington State to the ACC to go along with Stanford and Cal if we lose Clemson and FSU. But, I mean, those teams would be joining a conference that has a really bad TV deal through 2036. If you're Oregon State and Washington State, let's be honest, though, what are your options at this point? Can you join the Big 12? Well, probably not, because we got word that the Big 12 was interested in UConn and San Diego State. That is just a rumor. Maybe that's not true. I don't know. I'm just, talking about what I've heard. So it could behoove both Washington State and Oregon State to say, let's just get in a Power 4 conference. Beggars can't be choosers. It still is, a deal with ESPN. We're going to be relevant. Or they could, because think about it. Oregon State and Washington State do not have good options right now. Whether it's a merger with the Mountain West, they're not going to be making much money at all from that TV deal. You look at the Mountain West TV deal, they're making like $10 million, maybe if they're lucky. Those Mountain West schools, I think, are making like $8 million. The American schools are making like $7 million. And Oregon State has a debt right now with their stadium. They're going to be very desperate to try and get into a Power 4 conference rather than settle for some type of merger with the Mountain West, because you also do have the whole narrative, the Pac-4 is trying to rebuild. They say that. There's no rebuilding the conference. They're just saying it because they're trying to keep their Power 5 status and all of the perks that come along with it, all the additional revenue. And they're going to be able to keep it for 2 more years, but that's going to go away. There is no, even if they, the idea that, they're going to rebuild the Pac-12 by taking all the Mountain West teams. If you're adding 12 Mountain West teams to the Pac-4, that just becomes a bigger Mountain West, right? So it just doesn't make much sense to me. There's only 4 teams left. You just don't have the capital to rebuild anything. It's already all been destroyed. You have less than half of your teams. I think it is, at this point for the ACC, a situation where Clemson and FSU, through some type of, facilitation from ESPN, they will be in the SEC. I cannot see ESPN losing those teams based on their current grip, the grant of rights through 2036. If the grant of rights was only through 2026, I still don't think ESPN would lose these teams because they would have leverage still, even if it was 10 years earlier. But you could definitely, if you're FSU and Clemson, make bigger threats about joining the Big Ten. I just can't see FSU and Clemson being able to get out from under ESPN right now. Now, they can join the SEC, which I'm sure they'd be fine with. And to be honest, FSU and Clemson are more of SEC programs than Big Ten, just based off of the way they operate, things like that. They just fit the SEC more, as opposed to someone like Stanford who fits the Big Ten, Notre Dame. I know they're in the ACC and certain things. I think Notre Dame fits the Big Ten the most. Not saying they're going to join the Big Ten. It's always something with them. But either way, at this point, when it comes to Big Ten expansion, possibly to 20 teams, there's the idea of getting the 3 20-team super conferences. I do still think the Big Ten wants Notre Dame and Stanford. You might say, well, they're not getting Notre Dame. Then they might have to turn to someone like North Carolina. And maybe they want the North Carolina-Duke rivalry in basketball. You could always do something like that. Now, that probably wouldn't be very popular considering both of those schools don't make enough in terms of football to really affect the revenue positively. But it's something they might do. North Carolina, Duke, academics, it's good. It would fit the Big Ten well. There are still a number of things they can do depending on what happens with the ACC. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.